From Unity Church of Christianity in Houston, Texas, this is The Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational Christian church providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress with the Reverend Howard Caesar.
At some churches, at this particular church I want to tell you about, the minister would once a month have some of the younger children come down front, and he'd give a little mini lesson for them, and then they would go on off. And he would usually address the children about something familiar from home, some gadget he'd use, some visual aid. And anyway, one Sunday, he had a smoke detector, and so the kids were all lined up below, and he began by asking the children if anyone knew what it meant when the alarm sounded from a smoke detector. And one little child spoke up, raised his hand, and said, "Means Daddy's cooking dinner." That's not fair, guys, is it? It'd be true of some of us, but not all of us. Some of you are, I shouldn't say us, include myself, are good chefs. Anyway, that's what this little boy said. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about dealing with the idea of different. We're different. And, there is that saying, dare to be different. Well, it sounds like you're being encouraged to be different. And that it's okay somehow, but the truth is, in many instances, different is dangerous. Different can single you out. Different can set you apart. It can place you under scrutiny. It can cause you to risk judgment or labeling or rejection, being different in various ways and dimensions. One of the biggest lessons that we all have to learn on our spiritual path is the idea having to do with judgment. Making judgments about others and other things around us. Jesus taught that, and all the masters and mystics taught it. And Jesus said, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." He says, "Judge not by appearances," because oftentimes we don't know, we don't understand. And so, though it's simple, we've heard it a lot, it's a biggie. It's really a biggie, because I really believe that all of us have, to some extent, judgment going on that we still need to get beyond. There's a story that was sent to me about a pastor. It's a true story, actually, fairly recent, I guess. It's a pastor who went to take the ministry of a 10,000-member church. And he was to be introduced that particular morning as the head pastor. But he decided to kind of pull a trick or give his congregation a test. And so essentially he dared to be different. And what he did was he disguised himself as a homeless person. And he really did a good job, because they had a picture of what he even looked like. And he was really dressed shabbily, had really old, wrinkly holes in the jeans kind of thing, and an old T-shirt was dirty and everything. And he had tennis shoes, and he had a ski hat on, or cap on his head, and looked really a little bit, questionable, I guess. And anyway, he walked around this ministry that he was supposed to take over and be introduced that morning. And he got there about 30 plus minutes before, and as people were filing in, he just kind of walked around that ministry and tried to connect with people. And there were only 3 people, he says, out of the 7,000 to 10,000 that were coming to the service that day that actually said hello to him. He asked some people for some change, saying he needed some food. And he said no one accommodated that one. And he went to the sanctuary to sit down, and he wanted to sit down in the front. And the ushers came and escorted him to the back. And he said they were very nice about it, but they asked me to go sit in the back. He tried greeting people prior to his being seated, and all he got from people were basically stares and some dirty looks, and people clearly looking down at him and judging him. And so he went and sat at the back of the church where he was told to go, and he listened to the church announcements and the preliminary aspects of the service. And when that was done, then the elders of the church got up and said, "And now it's time for us to introduce to you our new head pastor. And we would like to introduce you to him. Please welcome Pastor Jeremiah Stepek." That was his name. And so all the people applauded in anticipation. We're looking around, and they couldn't see anybody. And they were applauding. And then all of a sudden, this homeless guy stands up at the back of the church and starts walking down the center of the aisle. And all of a sudden, people start seeing him. And the applause and mouths start dropping open, and their eyes get big. And basically, he went up to the podium and took the microphone from the elders. And he, from there, said that he wanted to recite something from Scripture. And it's actually from the 25th chapter of Matthew, some things that Jesus said. And you're familiar with them, but I'll share with you what he went to say. And keep in mind that this was, the elders were all in on this, obviously. Ahead of time, he said, this is what I'm going to do. And so he read this passage, which goes, quote, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take this inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when? When did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' And the king will reply, 'Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for the one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" And after he recited this, he looked towards his new congregation, and he told them all about what he had experienced that morning before the service began. And some people began to cry, and others, many, bowed their heads in shame. And then he said, "Today, I see a gathering of people, but not a church of Jesus Christ," he said. "The world has enough people, but not enough disciples. When will you decide to become disciples?" And that was the question he gave to them. And you know what he did next? He dismissed them. I mean, what pastor does that without an offering? I don't know if the elders were happy about this, but anyway, he dismissed them and said, "I'll see you next week." So, first I want to promise you one thing. I'm not going to dress as a homeless person anytime. And I'm actually not going to do anything that would teach you and this feels, I'm trying not to be judgmental here too, it feels a little shaming, the method. But there are ways for us to learn. And there are two things I want to emphasize as a result of sharing that story and the scripture. And one is that I really want to emphasize where Jesus says, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." In other words, he's saying we're all brothers and sisters of him. All right, and so we talk about Jesus being our elder brother in Wayshore, and he is there defining that very much as we being his brothers and sisters. And he's really talking about, again, emphasizing how important oneness is, that we're really not just one little family, but we are a universal family. And the boundaries go on and on. And so that really it's the idea that we're all in this together and that we are all one family and that we are the creation of that one God and that we are all brothers and sisters of the same Spirit. And as we do for one or another, we're doing for ourselves and the whole, really. So it's a very powerful teaching, and I don't want us to overlook that. It's very important. The other point that the story seems to point out to me is that it indeed can be somewhat dangerous to be different. At least it can be risky, you know. There are indications in our society that that is true. And maybe it doesn't happen here in this congregation. I hope not. But the truth is that, you know, probably anyone would be a little bit leery or cautious of a person that was so extremely appearing different like that, to give some sense of balance to that analogy there. But you know, there are those who in the world are so quick to judge and so quick to label based on appearances and based on what happens. Some of you remember or may have heard in the news about Oprah Winfrey, who was, I believe, in Switzerland, and she went into a store and she wanted to buy a handbag. And the clerk there, you know, it was a very expensive, I don't know how many $1,000s handbag. It was like, ooh, that was big. Thank you, Diane. Don't buy one of those. But anyway, the clerk said, I wouldn't even get it, and said, you can't afford it. And so how wrong she was, bless Oprah. But anyway, there was also in the news, some of you may have noticed recently, just about the TV show Duck Dynasty. Okay, and I know it's some of your favorites. Some of you have never heard of it, but I never knew about Duck Dynasty. My son came over one night and brought it up on the TV, and we watched a little bit. It was very interesting. This is a reality TV show that has just been recognized as the #1 nonfiction series telecast in cable history. It's the most successful in cable history, and it's about a kind of a family, backwoodsy, hillbilly-ish kind of family, and they live in Louisiana in sort of the backwoods area, and they had gotten rich on having created and invented and sold a duck call, you know, for duck hunters. And so from there, it evolved into this reality show, in which they're becoming more wealthy, of course. But anyway, they were in New York, and they were in New York at a big fancy hotel. I think it was the Trump International Hotel, in fact. And they were promoting the 4th season of their series. And all of these guys in the family, if you haven't seen this, have beards down to their belt buckle. And so they're they probably dress a little rugged. And anyway, so one of the stars of the show went to one of the employees of the hotel and said, "Where is the men's room?" And the employee, instead of showing him to the men's room, escorted him to the door. And the actor, this guy from Duck's Dynasty, said he was very nice to me. You know, he walked me all the way to the door. He pointed down the street and said, "Good luck, have a nice day." And he jokingly said it wasn't racial profiling, but facial profiling. I don't know if it's any better. But anyway, so my point in all these examples is only to say that we all may struggle to some extent with different, in varying degrees and varying ways. Some people make, it is said, rather poor artists in life because all they can draw are negative conclusions in the things that they see. The world is full of differences, though. You know, there are so many, even in the common variety. You know, we dress different, we look different, we talk different. We have different cultures, different backgrounds, different races, different sexes, different education, different religions, different diets, different views on politics, different views on everything, different perspectives, different attitudes, different personalities that have been developed, on and on. So the big question that I would like for us to ask ourselves is, what room do we have in us for different? What room do we have in us for different? Because we will bump into different over and over and again and again. And how do we deal with that? Are we quick to judge? You know, it can be an unconscious thing. And it's so big and so important in all of the teachings of all the masters and mystics, and certainly was emphasized by Jesus. And so it's important to really get a hold on that and become conscious, because the tendency is to make different wrong, you know, or to make different bad, or to be afraid of different, you know. And I'm not saying that all of different is good and okay and safe and so forth, but I'm saying let not anything that is different somehow be bad or wrong. And so we are really spiritually in the mode of moving to a place where we have greater acceptance for all, right? And especially the key is it hurting or harming anyone, however a person is, appears, or is doing. Whatever it is, they're like among the likes and dislikes that are multitudes among individuals and can be different. You know, if you grew up in Greece, it's a very natural and accepted thing for men and women to go to the beach topless or in a nude, at a nude beach. And it, for them, is not a sexual thing. You know, it's just getting in touch with the forces of nature and without having any barriers, and it's things that they're accustomed to. They're in Greece. It's very natural, and they're harming no one. You got awful quiet. Now, I have not been to the beaches of Greece. It's not harming anyone, right? It's not for everyone. A lot of things are not for everyone. But do we make it wrong? You see? Do we make it bad? Do we do that? Let's take an easier topic. Music. You know, music is so varied. And sometimes in a church, you know, to keep everyone happy, you know, they want this hymn or that hymn. You're all very, very happy with us, I think, or else you're not telling us. But anyway, music, people identify with have so many different likes and dislikes. I may not like the music you like. You may not like the music I like. You know, I may not go to a concert with you to witness or experience acid rock or maybe rap. It's just not what I identify with. But I don't make you wrong. I don't throw the whole out with a part. And so some of society does that. And we hopefully don't do that ourselves. And if we are, we need to catch ourselves, because it's totally inappropriate. It's the same thing with religion, you know. I may not identify with your religious beliefs. You may not identify with my religious beliefs. We have made differences within family members, within co-workers. A person may not want to go and attend another person's church, but that doesn't mean that that person's church is wrong or bad, or one should stand in judgment of it, ever. It's totally inappropriate. That person or other people may find value in what it is that is their choice or their decision. It's for them to decide, you know. And so we should never reject reject the whole on the basis of a part or a portion of what a person is about or what their makeup is. And, you know, there are families and workers that have totally, you know, judged and created chasms between one another, as you've told me about it, some instances through the years. Different people that, you know, if you're not aligned with their particular views, they don't want anything to do with you. And so they've made you wrong and bad and dangerous. And that's not right. So I guess I'm talking to the choir, because none of you do that. I mean, I don't know. There's a great quote that I came across by a lady named Shannon Adler in some of her writings. And what she said is this. She wrote, "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, but I chose neither one. Instead, I set sail in my little boat to watch a sunset from a different view that couldn't be seen from the shore. Then I climbed the tallest mountain peak to watch the amber sun through the clouds. Finally, I traveled to the darkest part of the valley to see the last glimmering rays of light through the misty fog. It was every perspective I experienced on my journey that left the leaves trodden black. In other words, left a path where I had been. And that made all the difference." The beauty of that writing, the way it spoke to me, was, you know, sometimes we're given two roads, two choices, you know, yes or no, good or bad, right or wrong. And she said, "No, I'm not going down there. I'm taking neither of those routes. I'm going to experience some other angles and some other perspectives," you see. And she broadened herself, and that's what she said, and that's what she was about. And we all need to be open to something that's new and fresh, you see, and different perhaps. And different, you see, can be good. Different isn't always bad. Different isn't always wrong. Different can be good. That needs to be your mantra. When you have a resistance to something that doesn't necessarily be something you identify with, might not be your choice, but they're not harming anyone or anything, that's who they are, different can be good. Different can be good. And some would say that, all advancement really for humanity has been about, some blend or blush of different. New things, new products, new inventions, what have you. And even there, humanity, much of it will resist and hold on to what is familiar, what's comfortable. Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, in some of the letters that he left behind from the 1800s, he said this. He said, if one wants to be active, meaning to grow and to evolve, one must not be afraid of going wrong. One must not be afraid of making mistakes now and then. Many people think that they will become good just by doing no harm. But that's a lie. That is the way of stagnation, mediocrity. He has a point, We have people like in history, Galileo, offered something different, having had a telescope where he could see into the heavens and found that actually the Earth was not the center, but the sun was the center and the planets and the Earth rotated around. But he had to retract that in order to maintain his life. And he had to retract it for years and years by the church. And so there are things like that. Ralph Waldo Emerson is another interesting guy who was always open to transcending what is and what was, wanting to stretch the boundaries, maybe move outside the box, at least invite people to do that. He was always experiencing what was next in the evolution of consciousness. And he said, it was quoted to say, in man, the perpetual progress is from the individual to the universal and from that which is human to that which is divine. There's always that movement, you see. And he was not afraid of different. And he was the one who was a graduate at Harvard University Divinity School, and he gave the famous Harvard Divinity School address. And I've referred to it before, but the one little thing that I would like to share again is where he said, let me, and this is to the body, and there were other things that he was talking about that were out of the box at the time, but he said to the graduating class, let me admonish you, first of all, to go alone, to refuse the good models, even those sacred in the imagination of men, to dare to love God without mediator or veil, cast behind you all conformity, and acquaint men firsthand with deity. He was telling them as they went out as ministers, as graduates of the Divinity School, to cast aside all conformity, but to create a firsthand experience with God and be open to whatever it is that would lead people to that. Another way of saying it, as someone has said, it's better to be a nerd than to go the way of the herd. So different is often made wrong. Emerson, you may or may not know, was banned for decades from his alma mater. Banned for decades. He was labeled a rebel, and he was asked to return 28 years later as a celebrated public figure to receive an honorary doctorate from his school. So it just shifted. Where they once called him a rebel, didn't want anything to do with it, different was bad, different was wrong, now they embraced him, you see. There are alternatives in life, and we get to choose. Like some people choose alternative medicine. It's more holistic, it's non-conventional. Doesn't mean conventional is bad at all. It's just an add-on. Okay, it's not abandoning, making anything wrong. So again, we have alternatives that are there. Emerson was banned for different. Jesus Christ was crucified for different. Jesus was about spiritual transformation, not stagnation. He asked people to stretch. He asked people to think anew. He asked people to consider a new perspective. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, but what he was saying is I'm bringing to you a new way, a new truth, and a new life. It's expanded. It's not exactly as it's been. It's different. It's different. And he said and asked that we were not to think that he had come to destroy the law and the prophets, but that he had come to fulfill them, which means to fill them full, to make them more complete. And even what he shared, he hadn't shared at all, because there's a passage where he says, I have yet more things to share of which you are not ready. And essentially what he was saying in that is, why feed to a group advanced algebra when they are still having trouble struggling with understanding and living basic math? You know, makes sense. So what I get from that is, there's even what Jesus taught, there were delineations of even deeper and further things that some mystics have even delved into, and we make them strange or weird. Some people do, as opposed to embracing what has been their experience, and you can't argue with an experience. And so as we move into even progress as a people on a planet, there will be things that will reveal themselves to us that are new and different, but they are validated by an experience, by those who have had it. So are we quick to say different is bad? We need to ask ourselves that. And so there is something that Jesus said that is so important, and he said, let your light shine, you know. And the bushel, he said, that we should remove from us is basically sometimes the bushel of our lack of understanding and our lack of willingness to be open and to see and consider all. And so I personally am, you know, working on not being afraid of different. I'm looking at what are the corners of my consciousness where I bump up against something that I'm unconsciously judging different, you know. I don't know if I make it bad or wrong or experience a discomfort to some extent or what. I'm looking at that. I hope you will too, because it's so important for us to move beyond judgment, you know. And we are here opening ourselves to what is next. That's why the founders of Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, were about that. They studied all isms, all paths, and they blended together East and West, took the best of them all. But, you know, we open ourselves to a vast number of speakers that have different ideas and insights. You don't have to buy them all. You don't have to accept them all. We don't endorse everything they say. But it's like we shouldn't be afraid of different and make it wrong or bad. Different can be good. Different can be good. And so that's part of why I've gone even to taking people to John of God or experiencing India. I don't want to be closed off. I'll always be loyal to unity. I'll always be about unity, but I'm not going to be afraid to what is there that can help facilitate and accelerate a person's growth in consciousness and make it available for those who are ready and wanting. Different can be good. So as we live our lives, as we go forward from this day, let us remember not to be too quick to judge anything in our world that comes before us. And remember that we need to create some space. How big is your room for difference? For not difference, for different. Different can be good. God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. At Unity, we believe that God's presence of love and goodness is everywhere, and that life is meant to be good. You can find out more about Unity and our teachings at unityhouston.org.